I'm Aaron Graber with Ventrac, and today we're highlighting some extra versatility with these Ventrac machines. We're doing an application that we don't get to do very often. We're next to a soybean field and we are planting a food plot for deer season. This is a pretty typical application for planting a food plot. We are next to a whole soybean field that goes all across a bunch of different varied terrain, and on all of the perimeter is heavily grown up woods. Up to this point, the person who owns this property has been shoving a lot of those large trees and bulk material back into the woods, and getting that stuff away from the field as much as possible, obviously, is always the goal, to have as much plantable area as you can have. The deer have been doing a number on these soybeans though, and so what that means is there's a lot of vegetation growing up around the edges that's not actually harvestable vegetation, doesn't do anything, it's not productive. So this is a perfect spot to put a food plot in coming into the fall. What we had to do is come in with a few different pieces on the Ventrac. The first thing we did was use the bucket to get rid of a lot of the big holes and ruts that were made by the heavy machinery that was moving logs and trees around. And then after that, we're chasing it with two attachments that weren't necessarily made for this application primarily, but work really well for it. And that is the cultivator and the primary seeder. What I would say is that there's also a few other pieces in the Ventrac lineup that fit this application really well. Today we don't have a landscape rake or a power rake, but if we did, there are definitely spots where I would have used them to speed us up and do a little bit better job of leveling some of the terrain. The finish that you see behind me is a perfect planting finish, and that's because there's a lot of loose material on top, but there's hard pan underneath, so the water doesn't drain fully all the way through. That's what will happen if you use just a tiller. A lot of times I see these food plots go in with standard compact tractors and the only attachment they're using is a tiller. The problem is you're losing a lot of that moisture because it's draining too far, and you don't get the growth as fast and as vigorous as you'd like, so that the material comes up and the deer can eat as much of it as they need. Conceptually, this is the exact same advantage of using this attachment in its primary application, which is installing fine turf, especially around houses and in developments. Out here in this application, the one difference is there's a lot more natural debris in the soil, so it is a little bit more of a challenging task for this. What you'll see is the finish isn't quite as perfect as if you were going into a yard setting, but ultimately you're achieving the same thing, and we're going to have a planting surface that is perfect for this type of growth. Once we're totally done using the soil cultivator, we'll chase everything with our primary seeder. What we're going to be putting through the seeder today to attract the deer this fall is white clover, turnips, and alfalfa. We basically just dumped all of it in all at once, mixed it together. The nice thing about this piece is it meters out the material in a very fine way, so you can be very predictable about how much you're applying in this area. So what we're going to do is use the calibration tray to estimate how much material we want flowing out of this piece for a certain distance traveled, and then we'll go probably in a couple different directions to make sure that we have good coverage. The advantage of using this seeder versus using something simple like a broadcast spreader is it's going to get the seed to have a perfect seed to soil contact with a little bit of soil over top to protect it from birds and runoff if we get heavy rains before it can grow enough to establish roots. The last thing I want to say about working on this property with these machines is that they are the right machines for the job. They're low profile and wide with the dual tires, which helps us handle the terrain. The further up this hill you get, the steeper it gets. Up at the top, it's somewhere around 15 to 20 degrees. And these machines allow you to work efficiently and with as much stability and confidence as possible. If I owned this property, one thing I would say is owning a Ventrac, I would spend a little bit more time prepping this area up to this point to save a lot of time and keep the dirt on the hill. What you see is very typical of a farm field. You see the woods encroaching on the plantable area, and then eventually they come in with heavy equipment and push stuff back. But if you were able to clear paths on the edge of this area regularly with a tractor and probably a tough cut or flail mower, then you'd see that vegetation would stop creeping in towards the fields, and you'd ultimately not have to do that part of it. And what that would save you is you do see some dirt at the edge of this field that is going to be hard to reclaim back up top until all those roots rot away and you can go in and get a backhoe and move it back up the hill. So to be able to have one of these tractors and maintain the edges of your fields does save a lot of time in the long run. And then if you do want to do a food plot like this, you're able to come in and do it right away by just mowing the edges and then turning it over with the cultivator and then planting into it. The big advantage of all of that is if you were regularly mowing, you'd have a blanket of grass, no matter what kind it is, just random field grass growing, that has a root zone that keeps that soil stuck on the hill so that you don't lose any of it down in a washout. There is a swale that comes through this area, And we got to get this stuff planted and established so that if we do get any heavy rains from now till the end of fall, they don't take any soil with the washout into the woods. And that's really important to make sure that all of your farm fields stay stable over time. When we first showed up on this area, there's a wide variety of situations going on with the soil underneath. Some spots were totally bare, some spots had weeds growing to maybe my waist high, some spots had rocks and logs in them. So what we had to do was first get that debris away. And then after that, the soil cultivator did a really good job going through this and turning it into a uniform result where we have a singular seed bed that's going to act the same way all the way across. So we can set the seeder in the same setting and plant this whole area. Ultimately, when we're done, we'll be able to send the drone up and see that whole spot has gone from a lot of different conditions to perfectly smoothed over dirt, planted and ready to grow. Later on in the fall, these beans will come off the field and there'll be nothing out here except what we've planted, which will be a fantastic food source for the deer. We love showing extra applications like this on the Ventrac equipment because it's not the first thing that most people think of when they think of our machines. Of course, we're great on golf courses and in perfectly groomed yards and in snow removal and all of these other versatile spaces. But because you've got a tractor with endless capabilities, you can also come do unique things like this. If you have any other questions about installing a food plot using our equipment, feel free to reach out to us, leave a comment on this video, call us and ask us a question. If you have questions about other Ventrac equipment, you can see us on the website at ventrac.com and be sure to follow the channel for other videos in the future. Thanks for watching.